as we know, as you've already seen conversations today, our unemployment rate among young people is soaring. What needs to be done to change this picture has remained the same for many, many years. Joined now by our economics contributor, Ayabonga Cawe. Ayabonga, good afternoon to you. I suggested earlier in a conversation with Vusi Tembakwao that our economy and our society might be structurally biased against young people. Would you agree with that claim?
Afternoon to you, Stephen, and afternoon to the viewers of Newzroom Afrika. Well, I would agree with that claim, but I would further add that, the ability to create large-scale employment for everybody, not just young people, is something that our economy is structurally not created to do. So I think we shouldn't see the challenge of getting young people into gainful employment at scale as a challenge that is fundamentally different to our broader structural economic challenge, which is really to change the reliance of the South African economy on commodities, on high concentration of industry in key product and service markets, and all of which really, I guess, distribute income and value upwards whilst really impoverishing the overwhelming majority. And I think on the basis of that, we have a challenge of demand in South Africa, a structural crisis of demand that disproportionately affects young people. I mean, if you think about the number of young people, Stephen, who are not in employment, not in education, or not in any training activities, who are between the ages of 15 and 34, around 8.2 million people. Now that's the lion's share of our workforce. And it speaks volumes of the wasted potential that every single day is really wasting away.
So, Ayabonga, I mean, you and other people will all have had all sorts of conversations way above my pay grade about how to change this, right?
Yes.
Other countries are having the same problems, particularly in COVID-19, but I mean, India is a very good example of a country that has similar problems in some ways. Where do we start? I mean, education's clearly a problem. That's not going to be fixed in less than a generation just because of how long that takes. Higher adult education, maybe we can improve there. I know the time and time again, we've all spoken about the cost of mobile data. Those are some of the interventions. What else do we do?
It's quite interesting, Stephen, that you start on the supply side, because, for many decades now, I think for the last 50 years or so, everybody who's tried to solve the employment challenge has tried to intervene on the supply side. So we try and upskill young people. We try and get them into vocational education. We try and get them into, improving their employability. And that works on a very faulty assumption, which assumes that the jobs are there, but young people aren't adequately equipped to take up those jobs. And I think that's a wrong assumption. It's a wrong assumption going into an economy which for the last few decades has been rapidly deindustrializing. We've lost over 1 million jobs in the manufacturing sector and millions others in the mining sector over the last 30 years or so. And that speaks volumes of what has happened on the demand side of things. So we haven't done the right thing, Stephen, in terms of investing in our real economy. If you look at our gross fixed capital formation numbers, just as a proxy of bricks and mortar, factories, and all of the stuff that really employs people being built, we've done a shoddy job of that in the last few decades. And I think this is a perfect opportunity now with the COVID-19 crisis that we have to really bring in the demand side to our conversation. I think one of the things that were big lessons from the 1933 Great Depression and the recovery, for instance, of the United States economy was this understanding that you had to really stimulate labor demand in the economy. And all of that really is driven by, one, boosting household income so that you boost demand in the economy, but also boosting investment spending. And I think even if you look at the employment numbers in relation to when we've invested in South Africa, you can see a proportional relationship there. So all of the instances where we've had a rapid jolt of infrastructure investment is also when we've been able to probably create jobs and create a dent on unemployment. And in the moments where we haven't spent that money well enough is when really we've had the difficulty in employing people. I think the second dimension to the challenge, Stephen, is why I guess the supply side remains important. We have a challenge. And Bantu education and apartheid, the job reservation and the history that we have, divisive as it is, created a situation where people were not skilled. There was no pathway for them to be able to acquire skills that would allow them, as the economy changed, to be able to move in toe step with that. And what we have now is the challenge of an economy that is unable to absorb those with limited skill and those with no skill at all. And I think the primary aim really of policy, of any action in the corporate space and even community struggle and mobilization has to be around creating jobs at the scale that's necessary to absorb those with limited or no skill.
Okay, I mean, for example, we've seen situations where there have actually been stampedes, where someone like Transnet has had 200 jobs 200 jobs that don't require any skills at all. Thousands of people queue for 20 hours just for the chance to apply for the jobs. When you talk about infrastructure, you're talking about building bridges, building dams, doing what Roosevelt did in the 30s in the US. That's the kind of thing that would actually make a dent in unemployment, right? People would be able to be a part of that. Is that what you mean?
I'm also talking about building schools, homes, care centers, rehab centers in our communities, and social infrastructure as well. It's not just about the economic infrastructure, Stephen, but it's also about the social infrastructure that is able to really respond to what I call a crisis of social reproduction in our communities at a street level, at a household level, and even maybe at a sort of township and zone level. And one of the other issues, to the point that you're making, Stephen, is that if you go to any township or you go to any village in this country, you get a very strong and overriding sense that there's a lot of work to do. It might be the work of cleaning up the community, it might be the work of refurbishing infrastructure, it might be the work of building new infrastructure. But we're not short of work to do. We're not short of work to do. The big issue is how do we organize our scarce and limited resources to be able to channel work to where it is needed. And I think the reality is that in this country it's much easier for me to go to the capital market and raise money to build a mall than it is to maybe raise money to be able to build a reticulation line or to build a rehab center in a local community, or even to build the kind of care facilities that can free up the time of young women to be able to go into the labor market, because we know they carry the bulk of the care work that needs to be done for the aged and for the young in many of our households. I think those are the issues. And it's a real pity, Stephen, that many of the voices of young people in South Africa have effectively become demobilized, or in some cases become divided across party political lines, when we should really be saying that these are the common issues that we find across many of our communities, and how do you rally around to be able, one, to get young people gainfully engaged in trying to solve these problems, and in so doing, equipping them with skills and really equipping them with the organizational skills and the initiatives that can stand them in good stead.
Ayabonga Cawe, thanks so much. Such an important conversation, one we'll continue to have. So many interesting points coming through from it. All right, stay.